Aha! Today is vlog day 1077.
Put on his winter weight, has he? Yeah.
Good morning. Oh, I left my door open. I should probably close that. It is Friday. I keep thinking that it's a day later than it is, and it's messing with me, which is not completely out of character. Well, for one, I was reminded that I've been using this, for those of you who know what this is, and I think we're going to change it up in July. How many more shots do we have? I think we might be able to change this up in July. First week of July. We'll see. I have plans. I have ideas. In the meantime, as I've been talking a little bit more about writing and getting back into writing and feeling really good because I'm getting back into writing, like genuinely, it just feels so good to write again. It's been a long time. I thought I should probably talk a little bit about my publishing career today because a lot of you probably have no idea that I've written a bunch of books before. I mean, we've talked about it a little bit, like Into the Nanton. The art on my walls, for those of you that were asking about that recently, is all from this book, Into the Nanton. It's an illustrated journal of a guy who was exiled into the world's most hostile jungle in search of a man that he hated and probably would have killed if he found. Well, it would like to kill, or would punch in the face at least if he found him. And then last year we kickstarted Couriers, which is a post-apocalyptic sci-fantasy that was a lot of fun. For those of you who missed the announcement, I got about like a third of the way into the audiobook, recording the audiobook, and decided to postpone it indefinitely at this point. We'll see if I ever get back to it, but largely because I'm going to be unpublishing all of these books here soon and retracting them from the public view for bigger future plans, which is what we can talk about today at the end of the video. But before we get into that, I thought, well, you know what? Why don't I just run you through a little bit of the history of my writing, publishing, where I'm at today, and where, very briefly, I think we're going to go in the future. Something we talked about a little bit a couple weeks ago, but I'm just going to get you up to speed. In the meantime, I got to get going, jump on my wheel, and start heading towards coffee and working with Richard this morning, because, spoiler alert, we're working on some of that publishing planning today. When I was getting ready to join Mercy Ships, I also started writing my first full fantasy novel, like all the way through. Didn't finish it while I was in the States, kept working on it all the way through my training, and eventually, not onto the ship exactly, it's a whole other story, but finished it while I was in South Africa. At least finished the first draft on Christmas Day in South Africa, which is kind of cool. But what makes it one of my favorite stories ever was that I had some really good friends that decided to have a launch party for me in July when we did finally release it, which was super exciting. They rented out this little juice restaurant in Freetown, which was really cool. Had kind of the whole building to ourselves. It was a nice event that turned into kind of like a mini vacation for a bunch of people on the ship who wanted to come together and, just celebrate. We did readings, there was live music, obviously lots of juice and tons of good snacks. And it was super cool, super humbling. And especially because, the book itself, when I look back on it now, is just like, woof, there's a reason I unpublished it. The story itself, I definitely want to salvage, but the book, that whole trilogy needs a lot of work. But first, coffee. Been reunited. We're gonna head to his place to work a little bit and then move on from there. The second and third books that I published, though, are obviously going to be in that trilogy, if I'm talking about trilogies. And were finished at different times during my travels. I think the second one was finished while I was here in Paris on a vacation from Freetown, which was a great experience. I actually finished it in one of the libraries of the Sorbonne, I think. And then the third one, I think I finished in... Where did I finish the third one? So I finished out the trilogy while I was living here in Paris. And the experience between the three books was kind of indicative of a lot of what my self-publishing existence was going to be like. I released the first book at the tail end of Amazon's glory days. Managed to sell a couple thousand copies and give away like 40,000 copies in different promotions. So I learned a lot through that experience, but then each successive book after that sold less and gave away less.
until the third book, I had like the most press. I had some really cool competitions and events that went around it, and barely sold any of them. For me, that was a real watershed moment because I had to decide, or at least do some soul searching as to why I was actually in the publishing gig. When I got started writing the first one, part of it was because I was like, ooh, I'm going to Africa, I want to write this and make sure that it's out in the world before I get malaria or something. But part of it was really that I was also struggling under my debt load in a really challenging place where I was barely making any money, I was barely making ends meet, and I kind of bought into the idea, this pipe dream that's out there, that through publishing, I could actually make some money. Maybe I'd get lucky and sell the book and make a ton of money. Not realizing something that I would come to learn later on, the fact that there's basically no money in publishing. Not that there isn't money in publishing, obviously, but for the vast majority of people that publish a book, whether traditionally or self-published, there really isn't any out there. And so it's a lot of work, a lot of investment. And if you're doing it for the money, you're probably going to be disappointed. Which for me was a good moment. I had to really sit and think and dwell on it. I listened to a lot of Malcolm Moore at the time, and that was really inspirational. And I came to the conclusion that I'm going to keep writing books because I love writing books. I'm going to need to be smarter about it, and I do want to be successful and eventually share those books with the world, with as many people as possible, and maybe make a living at it one day. But also recognizing that I couldn't do it with that as a realistic expectation. I had to do it because I loved it or not at all. And in the end, I just love writing. I love writing books. I love sharing these stories. I need to share these stories. And so I pushed forward pretty much completely out of a desire to do that, just write and share those stories. And now it's lunchtime, which Gustav, you shouldn't be this excited for because he's not going to get any more waiting.
Here, and I might have to get you. I don't think I can take Gustav in.
All right,
so do you want to?
got it. Gustav and I are going to wait for Richard in the shade out here because Gustav's not allowed in the mayor's office. This is the mayor's office of the 3rd, which is going to become the mayor's office of the Central Paris. I don't remember what they decided on the name. They're combining the first 4 arrondissements into one big one, at least administratively, which we'll talk about more in the future. We've talked about it a little bit in the past. That first trilogy that I wrote was a story that I'd had in my head since I was in high school and really wanted to get out on paper. And there are elements of it that I'm going to keep and move forward. And actually elements of it are very important to the ongoing nature of the larger story. So for a little bit broader context, for those of you that maybe weren't even aware that I write science fiction and fantasy, I've written and published, I think, 8 or 9 books that cross a few different genres but are all within the same world. It's all either fantasy or sci-fantasy. And ultimately the goal is to flesh out this entire world with one overarching story that all comes together in a climactic moment at the end. Whether those are standalone stories or trilogies or series, that they are stories you can enjoy on their own, but if you were to read them all and enjoy them and probably read them in a suggested order, that you would get a really good sense of a broader story that's being told that would come together in one final story. And so that's a lot of what I'm going to be working on with Richard. After that trilogy, I wrote a short book that I think I worked on while I was in the Congo. I think I finished it while I was in the Congo. At least I finished drafting it in the Congo, called Dark Horse, which is a short book that kind of is a vignette into some of the mechanics of the world, like the ascension of a demon, basically. Then I was inspired to write Into the Nanton, which is the world's first real-time fantasy blog. And that was me kind of processing a lot of my own personal growth and experience in living in the Congo and in West Africa and overcoming my own self-righteousness, more or less, and my own ignorance. Just processing the experience that I had with mercy ships in a fictional way, as inspired by the DRC and how that fell apart and a whole number of things. So that's what I launched myself into as soon as I was done with mercy ships. And it was a pretty intense project. Trying the vegetarian Beyond Meat option. I'll let you know how this goes. So that Beyond Meat was amazing. If vegetarian burgers tasted like that, I would eat them gladly every day. Well, I mean, I'd eat burgers every day anyways, but without the beef. That's a great substitute for beef. That was delicious. It wasn't as good, I would say, as beef, but on that level where I wouldn't miss beef the rest of my life if I had to have a burger like that regularly. I'm impressed. The best veggie burger I've ever had. Very delicious. PNY is always good too. They are, of course, in my guide, which is something else I've written. It's not a book, if you want to jump on that. Into the Nanton was one of those things where I was looking for a way to serialize content. I was looking for a way to build an audience. One of the things that I realized through my trilogy steadily declining in sales and Dark Horse doing okay, but honestly not great, was that part of the problem was that all those people that had found me and enjoyed my first book didn't necessarily know a second, third, or fourth had come out. I had no way of communicating with them regularly. I had no way of, keeping their attention and keeping them around around all the time. And so one of the big things that I realized I needed to change was I needed to develop something that was ongoing in some way of engaging an audience, growing an audience, and keeping them around so that they would know when something was going on. And so Into the Nanton was ultimately the response to that. I've been thinking about it for a long time. I thought about sharing some of the fables that I'd written or sharing some of the world building elements, the different history elements from my world. I was trying to think through all that, and it was way too meta and definitely way too niche. And then the idea for doing a serialized blog that was released in real time as if it was written by this guy who was in the jungle, exiled from his homeland. Maybe this would be a way of growing an audience. And it did. I mean, in small ways it did. I ended up kickstarting the second season, and between those seasons released Shadows of the High Ridge, which was, I guess, my seventh book if you count it in order. Shadows of the High Ridge was a tie-in novel, but it was kind of a prequel at the same time. And a really fun book to write, a really fun book to share. I felt like I grew a lot. It was a short, quick read, really fun. But again, just kind of one step short of where I wanted to end up. And that's when I started thinking, you know what, maybe I should look towards traditional publication to help me build and grow this audience. Traditional publishing wasn't something I was as interested in before because I really enjoyed the business elements of self-publishing. I enjoyed the control, but I was realizing, this is gonna fall short for me and maybe I should move into this. Anyways, I should probably catch up with Richard. Richard's in here buying pajamas for one of his kids and it's air conditioned in there, so I'm gonna go into the pajama store now. Nice to find one air-conditioned spot, and national sales are about to kick off, so if you're gonna come to your shopping, July, you need shirts.
I need to go shopping for shirts.
I need shorts, actually. So anyways, sales are here, and now perfect timing because it didn't get hot until it was time for sales, so now it's time to buy shorts. With Into the Nanton, I dedicated so much time, energy, and money into producing it because I was doing it as a writing exercise, trying to just make sure that I was actively writing, putting stuff out there, learning as I went. It was an experiment with the medium, incorporating the illustrations and eventually incorporating audio. So I invested a lot into the artwork and then eventually into the audio, more into traveling to conventions and so forth. Thankfully, I had a consulting job at the time that I took this job basically out of volunteering for Mercy Ships, that I took everything that I made from that job and invested into the Nanton basically. So I, rented a couple of booths at conventions and hand sold books and just tried to meet people and tried to spread the word. I went to a lot of different conventions, bouncing around the country while actively producing the story live as we went. There was just a lot of time and energy and work that went into it. And what was kind of crazy about it was that it created a small audience, and that audience grew a little bit over time, but it wasn't enough of an audience to support the project itself, especially as it got both expensive and I ended up losing my consulting job along the way and couldn't afford to pay for all that artwork and all the voice acting for a third and final season. And so I put that on Kickstarter as well, and it didn't go anywhere. And that was really both discouraging, but in a way a relief, because I realized I kind of wanted to take a step back and revisit it and rework it at some point, which almost brings us to where I'm at with working with Richard here in the near future. One of the things that I had done in trying to make that transition towards traditional publishing was I had been in talks with a publisher about buying one of my next books, and so I wrote couriers for them. They looked at it, gave me some notes, I worked on it again, gave it back to them, and then they ended up not taking it. We had some more discussion, and then I went for Agnar's box and started working on Agnar's box and drafted that, and we went through the kind of same process, and they came back and they said that they didn't want that either. And more than anything, I think what I learned from that was that, well, for one, I need to make sure that I write what I want to write first and foremost. I had a few different books in mind to start working on, and Courier is what was most interesting to the publisher and was honestly least interesting to me out of the three as far as projects went. And I should have just written what I was most interested in, what I was most excited about. The other thing was I really learned how it wasn't personal. That rejection that I was getting from these publishers, from agents, from everybody that was rejecting me, which was everybody in the traditional publishing world that I reached out to, not all of them. What I learned about it was that, there were elements, people within that publishing house that loved the books that I was handing them. They really enjoyed them and they were really excited to read whatever I sent them next. It wasn't that they didn't enjoy them, they didn't like it, they didn't see potential in it. It was just, it didn't fit within the business at the time, within their publishing schedule, whatever the reason was. There were different elements that didn't reflect on me personally or as me as a writer. And so that also brings us back to what I want to do in the future, because I know we all say that we're grateful for the way things turned out at one point or another, but I am actually grateful for how this is turning out, because I think, especially through how things have gone with YouTube, which has been another audience building exercise, which has been very successful, thankfully, it's opening opportunities for what I really, really would like to do long term in the future that I don't think would work with traditional publishing. We'll go into this in more detail in the future a lot. I really want to share my plots and planning and the strategy with you as much as possible, but the future for me looks like removing all of those books. The first 3 are already off of Amazon. They're not available. I'm going to remove the rest from my printer as well as from Amazon so that they also won't be available. Basically, I'm going to strip the internet of evidence of, well, not entirely of evidence, but over the next 5 years at least, sit down and with Richard and hopefully with some others, I'm going to build a team over time is the plan. Really outline and build the structure for the entire story. And what I mean is like that 50 book series, if that's what it is, that 50 book universe, I want to start at the very end of that, figure out all the players that are involved at the end, all the ways that they have to come together, and then branch those out into their stories, then branch back and connect it to the other stories that I've already written or already planned that exist in the middle or at the beginning. I have stories from very, very early on in the history of the world, very late in the world. Making sure that it's all tied together in a way that I'm not going to back myself into a corner in the future, I think is really important. And I have this opportunity. I'm in no hurry anymore. I've already published 8 books. I had said that I would self-publish 10 books in 10 years. That was a personal goal. And if I count the guide that I wrote for Paris and maybe this book that I'm writing about myself as my 10th book and my first nonfiction book to self-publish, that'll be kind of the end of it for now. And I see there being a lot of potential to work with traditional publishing on some nonfiction projects. There's one in particular that I really want to, that I'll talk to you more about here very soon as well. So I will be pursuing traditional publication for one of the projects that I have in mind. It'll be a book about Paris. Don't worry. And there's a lot to come with that, and I'm going to need your help, and I'll let you know how, and I'll let you know more about how that's going to look here in the near future and what the strategy looks like, all of that. But basically the future for me looks like taking some of those nonfiction projects, taking the Paris stuff, taking YouTube, everything that I can build with what I have right now, everything that I can grow, and investing that heavily into my fiction, heavily into the future of that, and building out the publishing schedule, building out all those books, and hopefully also building a film studio down the line and developing it into something really big that can carry the whole story forward and deliver it straight to you. So that's where a lot of this has come. I've wanted to do this for a long time. It was one of the original reasons that I started self-publishing, was because I hope to find partners along the way, and I hope to be able to work with people in the industry, obviously, that want to be a part of it. But I also realize that traditional routes aren't going to get me to where I want to go. So I have to create my own route. And I hope that the opportunities that are in front of me are the first steps to really get that ball moving. Yeah, that's kind of that's a real, I don't even know what kind of overview of my publishing history and a little bit of a peek into what I hope is my future, but there you have it. I hope you're interested. Please feel free to let me know if you are or aren't in the comments below. But I will be revisiting all of this I just covered a whole bunch of subjects or potential topics, and I'll be sure to revisit those in detail in the future moving forward and talk through my reasoning and my thinking and why it is that I'm going to be doing the things I'm going to be doing when I'm going to be doing them as much as I can. And I hope that you enjoy the ride. I hope I enjoy the ride. I hope you enjoy the ride entirely. So anyways, I'll see you bright and early tomorrow morning for a Pride Parade here in Paris. It's Pride in Paris tomorrow, and I've never been to a Pride Parade before, and I have a few friends that invited me to come with them. So I figured, you know what? Yeah, it looked like it was a lot of fun last year, and I wasn't even in town. So I will go for a couple hours. I'm still way too exhausted and not feeling great, but I want to go for a couple hours, and I want to check it out. And so that's what I'll be sharing with you tomorrow. So I hope you tune in for that, and I will see you tomorrow for that. Adios.